Record. Recording is now in progress. Okay, so hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Alejandro. I'm the horticultural educator at the garden. So I'm really excited to talk to you all about what's happening in the native plant garden this time of year, highlighting the winter wonders of the garden, so to say. I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Kevin Spracher, our interpretation and exhibitions curator, who will be moderating the chat. So please feel free to drop questions in the chat, leave comments that will be moderated by Kevin. So again, I'm really excited to be here talking to you about what's going on in the native plant garden. I'm also really excited because outside of the trivia, all the pictures I've included in this presentation, I have taken. So I like to say that I'm practicing my photography skills. So after tonight, I really want to encourage you all to get out there, take pictures, and interpret the native plant garden through your own lens. So this has just been a really rewarding experience to put together these slides and um, really bring you the native plant garden through my eyes. But before we officially get started, I also just want to recognize that although this is the winter wonders of the garden, I don't want to present the illusion that everything is good and dandy in the world, right? There's so much chaos in our political climate right now. Our conservation is at the forefront, and we're really asking ourselves and presenting it as a case of importance. And we add more than ever, this is an opportunity to talk about the fact that biodiversity matters and it's important that it thrives in the face of climate change. And that also brings me to the devastating fires. Our hearts and minds are with everyone who's been devastated by the Eden Canyon fires, Palisades fires. And I know it's so hard to get stressed out about it and worked up, and it's a very traumatic event, and it's very valid for you to feel the way you feel about it. But in times like this, I also just want to remind people to look to native plants as a source of power. I just want to remind people of the regenerative wisdom of the landscape. And just like plants come back after devastating fires through, impressive root systems, impressive burrows, through fire adapted seeds, us too, as humans, we will come back from these devastating events. So I just want to remind people to really to look towards the plants as the teachers. That's one of our educational principles here at the garden. We see the plants as teachers, and I think now more than ever, it's really important to fall back on that. So I just wanted to say that I thought that was really important to bring up tonight. But now, Kevin, it's time for one of your puns.
Oh gosh. Okay. So this to lighten the mood, I guess, after that very poignant speech, I get to tell a dumb joke. What kind of jokes do coast live oaks like, Alejandro?
Um,
You already know the answer.
I do.
Acorny ones. Acorny. The acorny jokes.
I
Okay, that's
said
enough
Joe
for me.
Oaks earlier. I thought
That
that's
was better.
also a valid answer.
Joe
Cool.
Oaks.
So I'll
Okay.
I'll be calling on Kevin at random times throughout the next 50 minutes for those random puns. So be prepared, y'all. Okay, so let's get started. So when I think of the native plant garden, one word comes to mind. One thing that I strive to communicate when it comes to native plants is I want people to embrace dormancy, and that's one of our horticultural principles here at the garden that really guides our horticultural education programming. We want people to embrace dormancy. We want people to see brown as a color, and we want people to really take pride in place, right? California is one of five summer dry areas in the world, California has a Mediterranean climate. And because of this Mediterranean climate, there is a dry season, or what we call a drought season. And those environmental factors, those specific microclimates have shaped the evolution of plants to be drought adapted. So plants will take on many different forms. They've developed many different strategies to withstand either summer drought, or there are remnants of winter deciduous ancestors that plants still have where they drop their leaves in the wintertime. So this is the winter wonders of the garden. So one thing that people will notice as you visit the Botanic Garden, or you visit other native plant gardens in town, or visit natural spaces, is we are seeing winter dormancy. And dormancy, as I have described here, is a state of reduced metabolic activity under conditions of environmental stress. When it gets hot in the summer, plants go dormant. It's a time of chaos. It's a time of shutting down to withstand those conditions. I go dormant in the summertime, so I look to the plants for that advice. So I just want people to think about dormancy and think about examples of dormancy that you're seeing on your walks or your hikes or even in your own garden. So the winter garden. Um, There's so many features that encompass the winter garden. And so I'm going to take you through a couple things that I'm noticing in the garden this time of year. One thing that really is so noticeable are winter dormant grasses. If you visit the Botanic Garden, it's quite different than the sight you see in the springtime. Oftentimes, when you think of the Botanic Garden, you think of the fields of poppies that are, blanketing the meadow. And oftentimes, it's a very common question that we get in the winter time that, where are the poppies? Where have they gone? And that's one thing we want people to embrace. You want people to embrace the changing seasons. And I really love that Santa Barbara Botanic Gardens meadow is a living embodiment of that, of the changing seasons. So one thing to keep in mind as you're perusing the garden is think about plants that have gone winter deciduous or have gone winter dormant. And for a lot of our grasses, that is the case this time of year. Despite a very dry winter, and we'll be talking about dry winter conditions, we are still seeing the emergence of wildflower seedlings. So I have a couple pictures in this presentation of like young poppies coming up, young clarkias, and the work that our gardeners are doing at the garden to make sure that we see flowers in the springtime. But because it is a dry winter, it's really up to the attentive gardener to water and to keep these areas moist to ensure the germination of these plants. So as the seasons are changing, as the climate is changing, we as gardeners must also adapt and change our practices to fit those changing conditions. I also want people to think about the senescence of leaves of winter deciduous shrubs and trees. Plants like the American dogwood, Western redbud, Western sycamore. Those plants are actually they're losing their leaves, and this is actually a beautiful time of year to appreciate the structure of the plant, the branches that are normally hidden beneath a flush of new growth. This is actually a time of year to take a step back and notice those branches, notice those dormant buds that will leaf out in a couple weeks as the temperatures start to increase. Also, really cool to notice seeds and fruits that are persisting on plants. One of the trivia questions from the beginning was the toyon. This is an excellent time of year to look at the fruits of the toyon and other trees that bear fruits and think about how that's feeding the birds and how that's feeding wildlife at a time of year when there's not much else in bloom. And also looking for signs of new growth on summer dormant species. A lot of things are just waking up, even though we're not seeing a lot of winter rain. I'm really happy that this past weekend we did get I'm not sure if we got a few inches, but I'm glad that we got some rain. That should be enough to start to wake up things and get them out of that transition from season to season. So I'm going to start with grasses. One of my favorite things to appreciate in the wintertime are these what we call warm season or winter dormant grasses. I think they're beautiful because especially if you're taking a late afternoon walk, they're lit up beautifully by the late afternoon sun. The example that I'm showing you here is a bunch grass that I walk past every day as I'm taking my daily walk around the meadow. But this is actually what we call blue cane stem, or I think this is cane blue stem. I always mix up the names, but the botanic name is Bothriocloa barbanotus. I'm not sure if you can drop that in the chat, Kevin. I totally forgot to include the name here, but it's a wonderful bunch grass that is actually dormant this time of year. But what I really like about it are these beautiful seed heads that persist on the plants, especially when they're lit up by afternoon sun. I often think our native bunch grasses are underappreciated, and I love that Santa Barbara Botanic Gardens Meadow is an excellent opportunity to learn about grasses and which ones go dormant and how you can mix and match different grass species. Especially, I really like the habitat that they offer. They're great nesting material for birds, for smaller mammals, for reptiles, and they add so much structure and vertical structure and interest to the garden. So I definitely recommend looking at the mini bunch grasses that are available. Oftentimes, these are readily available in the nursery, but they often don't look like much in the cans because they are dormant. But trust me, once you plant these bunch grasses in the springtime, they really they green up and they add so much interest to the garden. So I'm a huge fan of the grasses. I wish people planted more grasses. We got to get more native bunch grasses out there. So in addition to the grasses, there's so many young seedlings that are coming up in between those bunch grasses. So this is a picture that I took as I was looking for signs of wildflowers, right? Because I've been curious, are we going to have a super bloom year? Are we going to get flowers? So I went out looking for these, and these are actually some that I found at the garden. So this is a good time of year to look out for emerging seedlings. If you have sown seed in December or earlier this month, what we recommend is getting out there and watering because nature, it's not raining. We might be experiencing a dry winter. So you yourself have to make it rain. You have to make it rain, everyone, because there's no water. There's no water, right? So we have to, if you want to get those seedlings to germinate, it's really important that in a drought year like the one we're experiencing, that you monitor soil moisture and ensure that seedlings are kept moist but not waterlogged. It's about striking that balance. So I was actually talking to our very talented gardener, Jorge, who manages our meadow section at the garden, and he told me that they're probably watering every 2 to 3 days to keep the poppy seedlings happy, because otherwise, if conditions are too dry, the young seedlings die, or if it's too wet, the plants might not make it because the roots are too waterlogged, right? So it's about finding that balance. So at the garden, we find that we're watering every 2 to 3 days to keep it going. But I definitely encourage you to get your hands dirty because everyone's soil, what we call your soil dry down rates, are different for everyone. So that's one of our other horticultural principles at the garden. Understand your site. And once you understand the site, don't fight it. Don't fight the site, please. I told you that. Don't fight the site. It's really important to know your site specific conditions so that you can pick the right plants for the right place, right? So just because it works for us at the garden doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And vice versa, just because it works for you doesn't mean it's going to work for the garden, right? So it's all about understanding what we call those microclimates. So I have a couple pictures here. So these are, does anyone recognize who these are? These beautiful, finely divided leaves, this iconic species. You can drop it in the chat. You can unmute yourself and say it.
Ross got it again.
What is it, Ross?
Just on it.
What was it?
Poppies, Gene Weeks, jumping on it.
Poppies.
Poppy.
We have poppies. We have poppies, right? So this is actually an example from my yard where I sprinkled a couple of or I sprinkled some poppy seeds actually in a rocky area. There's not a lot of soil there. There's a lot of like small peat gravel. And they actually come up, right? So it's also all about experimenting about which substrates are going to work better. So, you know, some people will say that they germinate best in mulch. Some people will say that they germinate best just in pure soil. I sprinkled them in some peat gravel here, and I seem to have gotten pretty good recruitment. But you'll notice that there's also other what we call weeds, right, or undesirable plants. So you may notice the plant with the palmate leaf is actually what we call a cheese weed or a malva plant. So those, when it's left uncontrolled, can outcompete your native wildflowers. So that's another thing to keep in mind as we're establishing wildflowers or establishing young seedlings. It's super important to weed. Weeding is lifelong in the native plant garden. Weeding is never weeding is never finished in the garden, right? So if you feel like you have nothing to do, um, you have to go weed, is what I'm telling you. Just another example of beautiful wildflowers that I actually took on a walk today. I actually came across this in our pollinator section or porter trail, which is cultivated and taken care of by our gardener Leo. And he was very proud of this. This is actually an example of establishing wildflowers underneath mature oak trees. You'll notice some of that oak fluff there. Him and I were looking at this and we couldn't quite guess what they were. This is where I need to improve like my wildflower identification skills. But if I recall correctly, last year in this area, there was a huge swath of purple houses. If anyone's familiar with that wildflower or Calencia heterophylla, there are these beautiful purple flowers, like pagoda structure like flowers. So that's what I'm guessing that these are, but they could totally be different. But just based on what came up there last year, and Leo has advised me. He gave me a couple ideas to share with the webinar this evening, and how he got this to get established under the oak tree is overseeding. It's never a bad idea to overseed, always with the expectation that you're going to lose some of it to predation. Birds love seed. They're gonna eat the seed. So overseeding and watering is super important. Just staying on top of the water and diligent weeding. So we hope to get these seedlings established. I hope they grow up to be
We
beautiful.
have a question from Ross, I think.
Yes, Ross, what's
Yeah.
up?
So the watering totally, because superseded underneath the oak trees in our yard, but
Yes.
I don't want to water them too
Yes.
heavily.
Hmm.
So what's the teaching and what's your wisdom on that?
Oof, my wisdom. I'll have to ask the oak tree. We have to ask the oak tree. I don't know if I have that wisdom. But one thing I will share, I had this conversation with our grounds manager, Stephanie, and they kept it real with me. And that's what I appreciate about them. They keep it real and they say, you know what, Alejandro, how do you water native plants under oaks? It's you just have to, right? Especially when you're at a botanic garden. It's
Mhm.
inadvertently those oak trees get water, but they did tell me that it's just important that the trunks of those oak trees remain dry at all time, right? So as a
Mm.
botanic garden, we garden under oak trees as an example of dry shade gardening, and we want to showcase plants that are shade adapted that thrive in the understory of oak trees and other large native trees. So of course the understory of that oak tree will get water, right, to keep those plants happy or keep those seedlings happy. But one recommendation that Stephanie gave me is just remember to not water near the trunk. Always, we try to avoid watering the trunks of the oak, right? So we try to move sprinklers in a direction where they're not going to spray on the trunk of the oak. So as long as the trunks aren't being watered, it should be fine, right? Because when you have those wet trunks, and especially in combination with warm weather, that's just going to be the perfect conditions for root rot or crown rot, and that can lead to disease over time on a mature oak tree. So I'd advise
Good
watering
question.
further away from the trunk if possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. All right. So before I ask Kevin for another great joke, I just want to show you the tree where those wildflower seedlings were. So this is actually a McDonald's oak, which is actually a super impressive oak tree in our collection. It's actually a hybrid oak. Some people I think say that it's a hybrid between a valley oak and a Quercus pacifica, which I'm forgetting what's the common name for that, but it's a hybrid oak, but it's a really, really impressive oak tree. And oftentimes people will say that it's difficult to get things established under oaks, but Leo, our talented gardener, is proving otherwise. So these are just a couple of the tips that he provided me with for getting native wildflowers established under oak trees. It's really important to overseed. You can never overseed. The garden we seed a lot this time of year to get flowers in the springtime. Super important to keep the soil moist. And one thing I forgot to mention here, but you also want to make sure that in areas where you do plan on seeding wildflowers, try to keep a thin layer of mulch, right? Because there's so many benefits to mulch. They help retain moisture, it helps retain moisture, suppress weeds, slowly fertilizes the soil. But there is such a thing as too much of something. And if you have too much mulch, that can oftentimes suppress the growth of wildflowers. So one thing he did recommend is maybe raking up some of that oak leaf litter at times. And we recommend leaving the leaves, but sometimes if you want to get things established, you may just want to clean up the soil a bit. And then also selecting the appropriate species, right? So if you are cultivating a shady spot or an area that receives part shade, there are going to be wildflowers that are better suited for those conditions. Some recommendations that come to mind are Clarkias. I especially love Clarkias because they're shade adapted, but they can also tolerate sun. So I love seeing just the Batas Clarkia or Clarkia bate under an oak tree. I think that's so spectacular and beautiful. Or the purple houses that I mentioned earlier, the Calencia heterophylla. So those are just a couple of the species that we're playing with under this mature McDonald oak.
Alejandro, as you're talking about the species, we had a question.
Yes.
If you could explain just a little bit about how you seed, like, do you scatter? Are you mixing it with anything? Do you rake it in?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Y'all are asking such great questions. So in general, you can take bare seed and scatter it over an open area as long as you've weeded it and it's clear of weeds. Some folks will also recommend what we call horticultural sand, and you can take maybe 3 parts horticultural sand to 1 part your seed, wet it. That way, the seed actually adheres to the horticultural sand so that it's much better protected when you do sow it. And oftentimes people will actually just take a light layer or a light application of just standard potting soil mix and just use it as a thin cover layer for your seeds that you just sowed. So there's many different ways to approach it, but generally an area that's clear of weeds and an area that you're going to be able to water easily in the cases of a dry winter like the year we're experiencing? So great question. All right, Kevin, do you have another joke for us? I think it's time for a joke, a pun.
Yeah, I do, Alejandro. I do. So why do salvias make such good friends? Do you know?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
They're they're good friends to have because they always give sage advice.
Ah,
Uh,
I feel like I could hear
ah.
people groaning before I even start
Well,
these.
no,
So
no, that's what we call a
they
knee
just get
slapper.
worse from here. I'm starting with the good ones.
Okay, doubt it. I doubt it.
Okay.
Okay, y'all. Okay, so enough about wildflowers. I want to turn people's attention to, so we talked about winter deciduous shrubs, right? This is also a time of year where we can embrace the structure of a lot of native plants, their branching structure that is usually hidden under leaves. So I just want to point out a couple of winter deciduous shrubs that we have here at the garden this time of year, and maybe you'll notice them on your next walk and maybe become inspired to incorporate them in your garden. On the top left-hand corner, we have a western elderberry or sambucus with signs of new growth. Excellent plant. I really love the Western elderberry. People use it as a small tree, as an informal hedge. The fruits, from what I've read, are edible, but you just want to make sure that they're really ripe. If you're looking to create a bird-friendly garden, Sambucus is excellent for attracting our feathered friends. On the top right-hand corner, we have, I think that's the American dogwood or a species of Cornus, which if folks are from the East Coast, they may recall dogwood. Is we also have a couple species that are native to Western North America. That one is located in our arroyo section, feature or section of our garden that celebrates California's riparian ecosystems and plants that usually prefer year-round water. So something like the dogwood would be best suited for maybe a damper spot in your garden. On the bottom left corner, we actually have one of my favorite native plants. I didn't really discover this plant until I started working at the garden. On the bottom left-hand corner, we actually have spice bush or
Hmm.
Calycanthus occidentalis. Um, Really beautiful deciduous shrub, but when the plant is leafed out again, I definitely encourage you to smell the leaves because they have like a spicy scent to them. They smell like cinnamon to me. It's like very musky. So that's spice bush. And on the bottom right hand corner is actually a very popular landscaping plant. We have Western redbud or Cercis occidentalis. Actually, a really beautiful time to observe the structure of the plant, notice some of the dormant or nascent buds on the branches. But also for thinking about the maintenance of these plants, if you yourself have these in your yard, this is actually the best time of year to go in and start to prune to improve the structure of these plants or remove crossing branches or maybe open up airflow so that the plants have a much better form this following spring. So something like the Western redbud, that is a plant that is actually pruned this time of year, right? Because you can actually see if there are crossing branches or if you want to achieve a desired form, say you want to give it more of a tree-like form, this is the kind of gradual pruning that we recommend in the winter time. Same with a lot of deciduous oaks. I don't have pictures of deciduous oaks, but if you have a valley oak or any kind of deciduous tree, like a sycamore, this is actually the best time to do those kinds of cuts just to clean up the structure.
Alejandro, Scott was
Yes.
asking, when do you think is too late to heavily prune an elderberry?
Um, if that's a great question, Scott. Um, I have to think about it. I think so. The one that's really happy at the garden, I don't know if people have seen it, but one of my favorite specimens we have at the garden is in the arroyo section next to the tea house. That's actually where the top left-hand picture is taken from. It's starting to show signs of new growth. So I certainly would, if you're planning on coppicing or cutting back the plant heavily to its base, I would probably do that sooner rather than later because that may come at the expense of new growth, flowers, and subsequent fruits. So I'd say usually maybe February or March might be the latest to do any kind of these harsh cutbacks on winter deciduous species because soon enough they will want to start to leaf out. So that is the best answer I have for that. That's a good question. All right. So planting, we're also doing a lot of planting at the garden, right? Even though it's a dry winter, all of our gardeners are doing some kind of planting in their section. So it's been really cool to walk around and see just these new plants being installed and talking to our gardeners and seeing how are they caring for plants during a dry winter. The answer is hand watering. We're hand watering a lot at the garden this time of year, despite dry conditions. So despite these dry winter conditions, we are in the middle of planting season. So one piece of advice that our grounds manager Steph gave me is we are hand watering. Expect to hand water or water these plants frequently during dry spells. The key, and I don't want to get too into the details of establishing native plants, but native plants, they follow the rhythms of the season, and the best time to get native plants established or the best time to get them installed is when it's coolest and when it's the wettest. And in a summer dry climate or in a Mediterranean climate like we live in here in California, the best time to do that is the winter time, because we're experiencing cooler temperatures, and ideally it is raining, because that way you're ensuring that those plants are going to develop a deep, robust root system for them to be able to withstand future years of drought. Or as we enter the summer, they're going to be able to withstand those conditions. But the key is getting them established in the wintertime for the first few years, depending on the plant that you have. One other piece of advice is getting your hands dirty. You're not a gardener if you're not willing to get your hands dirty. Okay, I said that here first. So you need to get your hands dirty and get a feel for your soil dry down rates. You know, you want to be able to, I always say you want to be able to make a tortilla, or a mud pie, whatever you want. You can call it whatever you want, but I call it tortillas. So you want to be able to take a sample of soil that's wet, and if you can make that into a ball or you can, yeah, you can mold that into a ball or like a mud pie or tortilla that holds its shape. It's probably heavy soil that's going to hang on to water or moisture for dear life. That's what you call heavy or clay soils. Those are going to be soils that maybe you don't have to water as frequently. On the other hand, if you try to make a mud pie or tortilla and it breaks in your hand or you feel those gritty, rocky particles, you're probably going to be on the side of a sandier soil. It may not be pure sand, but it's going to be leaning towards sand. There's much more sand particles in your soil. Those are going to be soils that you're going to have to check and monitor much more frequently than a gardener who has clay soil, right? And it is possible to have different kinds of soil in your yard, right? Again, these are those site-specific conditions that we want to encourage you to have an understanding of before you select native plants for your site. It is possible to dig a hole or take a sample in one area, walk over 6 feet, and find that you have a very different soil type, you know, just 6 feet over, right? So again, it's those site specific conditions that we want to encourage you to understand before you visit the nursery. So it's important to do your homework, get to know your space. And here we're actually installing mugwort plants. Our gardener Sai, who cares for our Meadowview section, and our wooded dell and our tea house, really talented gardener. This is a flat of mugwort that is to be installed in the garden's wooded dell section. If you have visited the wooded dell section at the garden, it's really shady. There's a lot of mature shrubs, a lot of mature trees. So a lot of the plants that have been installed in that area are shade tolerant. So we have a lot of heucheras, we have a lot of mugwort, or usually plants from streamside habitats, plants that are adapted to a bit of moisture and lots of shade. One particular plant that Sai is really happy to have in their section is actually this plant here. Folks may be familiar with hummingbird sage or Salvia spathacea. It's such a gorgeous plant. But this one here in particular is the Santa Barbara sunset hummingbird sage. I'm not too familiar with the details on this one. I'm not sure where it came from. I believe I think this may have come from Santa Barbara natives, but I'm not sure if its origin, whether this is like a seed grown plant or if it's like a natural plant that came up or if it's like a wild selection, but it's called Santa Barbara Sunset. And just to give y'all an idea of what makes it unique, it has almost like a three-toned color flower. There's three kinds of flowers that come up on it, is what I'm understanding. You'll notice that it has like that light yellow flower at the top. In the middle, it kind of has like the lighter pink flowers. And then at the base, it has those deeper pink magenta flowers. So there's like three different flower colors that are happening on it. So again, this is the Santa Barbara Sunset Hummingbird Sage. So next time you visit the garden, I encourage you to take a look at these in the wooded dell section. Sai, our gardener there, is so talented, and they're particularly super stoked to have this plant as part of the living collection. So again, this is just the perfect time to plant a lot of herbaceous perennials or spreading herbaceous perennials, plants that spread through rhizomes like the hummingbird sage, plants like goldenrod, plants like California fuchsia. This is a good time of year to plant shrubs, woodier shrubs, and especially we're getting towards the end of the season for planting deep-rooted trees. If you are planting on installing, oak trees, sycamores, or even walnuts, this would be the best time of year to do it. So I would say plant those sooner rather than later. In fact, the garden just did a huge planting of native walnut trees on the east side of our property on a conservation slope. So a lot of those deep rooted trees, you want to get into the ground sooner rather than later before the temperatures start to warm up. But that's a gorgeous plant. What else is the garden planting this time of year? What else is happening, right? Bulbs galore. So Sai is also planting Humboldt lily bulbs in the wooded dell section. So if you've ever visited the garden in the springtime or your natural spaces in the springtime, you may have noticed these beautiful lily flowers or like these leopard lily flowers. This is the Humboldt lily or Lilium humboldtii. And it's one of California's many native bulbs or geophytes, plants that live for the majority of the year underground. So because of this, they have an adaptation or they have this underground storage structure that allows them to survive the summer as this dormant plant. It dies back to this bulb and it waits for really rainy years to grow from this bulb, leaf out. And on a good rainy year, assuming that the deer don't get to the flowers before it actually flowers or the deer don't graze on it, it blooms. It produces these wonderful orange spotted flowers that I think are just gorgeous. And to me, they symbolize the transition from spring to summer. I always consider Humboldt lily season to be almost like May, June. But depending on whether our deer will eat it, we'll see if they come up, or even on a rainy year or a year that's lacking rain, such as this one, I'm particularly interested in seeing whether they're going to come up or not. So it's an interesting experiment. So usually they are summer deciduous, dying back to the bulb in the summertime, and they are best planted in the fall. Usually tucked between boulders is what I was talking to our gardener Sai about, and where they're planning on installing them in the wooded dell area. So they're planning on planting them near boulders, or usually in natural spaces or in the wild. They grow in shady canyons, so areas that are protected from harsh sun. So definitely encourage you to look for these this spring, especially in areas that are recovering from fire conditions post fire. That's just going to be an excellent year for seeing what are those fire followers we're going to see. What are the native bulbs that are going to come up now that the landscape has been opened up? So it's going to be really interesting to see what fire recovery looks like and what that process of ecological succession looks like. All right. Is Kevin still with us? Kevin, do you have another pun you can share?
I'm still here, and
Kevin.
I have some bad jokes. Okay, so just for a little breather, Alejandro, how do you apologize to a native plant?
Oh,
It's
I
easy. You just say, "I'm sorrel." You say,
I'm
"I'm so sorrel." I have to
so
drop I have to drop a link to explain this joke if people
yeah,
don't get
yeah.
it. But
I
but
I'm so I'm so wood sorrel.
I'm
Is that like
so
that's the oxalis, right?
yeah, there's
Yeah.
like redwood sorrel though that we have in
Yes.
the garden and okay, moving on.
You're very appreciated, Kevin. Thank you so much for
Sure.
that.
Thank you.
Okay, and I also got to drink water, so it's great. So now let's talk a little bit about pruning, right? We're starting to appreciate the flowers. We're starting to appreciate new growth on plants, starting to get a feel for how to care for the landscape in the wintertime. What are some things to look for? But there is a bit of pruning that can be done. There's some pruning techniques that can be implemented this time of year. So what to know about pruning this time of year is that winter is the best time to prune and shape winter deciduous shrubs and trees. So as I mentioned with the Western redbud, a lot of summer dormant or fall dormant plants can actually be coppiced to encourage rejuvenation and to encourage better flowering or best performance in the plant. A lot of herbaceous perennial plants or spreading ground covers can actually be cut back hard this time of year. So if folks are familiar with plants like California fuchsia, mugwort, what else? Goldenrod. What else? Any kind of spreading aster. Those can actually be cut back hard to the ground. Matilaha poppy. Those get cut back to the ground hard in the fall or latest winter, and soon enough they're going to start to resprout. So I have a couple of pictures there of here that detail that. But this is actually Encilia californica, or our bush sunflower, and actually took these pictures of a stand of bush sunflower that was actually pruned during one of our pruning classes by students participating in the class. And what was being demonstrated here was that process of coppicing. So something like the bush sunflower or Encilia californica is a semi-woody shrub from the coastal sage scrub plant community. They do get woody, but every few years, or actually every summer, when they're dormant or summer dormant, you can actually cut them back to the base or back to the points of new growth or origins. And soon enough in the fall, when temperatures get cooler, when the landscape receives some moisture, they'll start to leaf out again. And especially at the Botanic Garden, where we are, because we are a garden, we don't truly let the plants go dormant. And what I mean by that is that we still irrigate in the summertime, right? We may cut back a little bit on water, but because we are a botanic garden, we're showcasing native plants. We do want to make sure that, you know, um, that we're striking that balance, right? We're letting the plants that truly want to go dormant. But if there's a plant that we can keep just a little bit more crisp, just a little bit more fresh with a bit of supplemental irrigation in the summer, we're gonna go for it. So something like the bush sunflower responds well to summer water or garden water conditions. And soon enough, this same plant started to do this in this next picture I'm showing you. So just this flush of new growth right now. And then soon enough,
Alejandro,
yes.
oh, sorry. I'm sorry
Yeah,
to
go for
interrupt.
it.
This is so good.
Yeah.
Laura just wanted you to quickly, can you re-say the plants that should be coppiced right now? I know you said Matilla hot poppy,
Oh, for sure.
but
Yeah, I said plants like any plant that's like or spreading through rhizomes. So plants like goldenrod, fuchsia, Matilaha poppy, mugwort, any kind of like spreading herbaceous ground cover can be coppiced in the wintertime, and it should rejuvenate as the temperatures get warmer. But also a lot of summer dormant shrubs or subshrubs that can handle it, like the Encilia californica or the bush sunflower. So and so this bush sunflower, this picture of the flowers was actually taken today. It's actually blooming in late January, full bloom. And for sure, this is a plant that was cut back in the fall. So just an example of the just the regenerative power of pruning. You know, oftentimes pruning is a stimulatory action for plants. And when we prune, we're going to encourage new growth. We're going to encourage a much more dense growth habit. So I know oftentimes people are afraid to prune, but you know, part of how you learn to prune is listen to the plant, see when it starts to produce new growth, start to cut it slowly, right? Phoebe, our gardener for our manzanita section, actually imparted this great advice that I had forgotten, but they actually said, because they care for manzanitas, and we won't talk a whole lot about manzanitas this evening, but manzanita is definitely a plant that wants to be cut back judiciously, very careful. So they actually said to me, one thing that they think about when they're pruning manzanitas in the summertime is you can always wait, how am I going to say this? You can always prevent cutting the manzanita, or you can, like, you know, take your time and say I'm going to go slow and prune it, or I can never get those cuts back once they've been made, is what I'm trying to say, right? So you can always cut, but you can't take those cuts back once they've been made. So they prune judiciously. So that just reminded me to remember that it's important that when you prune, make a cut, take a step back, and see visually how the plant has been impacted, right? So it's really important to take your time with pruning.
do
Just some more
you,
examples. Yeah,
before you go on, do you want,
yeah.
Susan asked about salvia species, pruning those?
Oh, shall we talk about salvia? I have a slide coming up on salvia, so stay tuned.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna skip this slide here, or actually I won't. So I superimposed the pictures. I forgot to make them disappear, but this is a pitcher sage, and this is
Mm-hmm.
just an example of how it's actually leafing out right now after it got cut back in the summertime. So a lot of shrubs are starting to rejuvenate with new growth. Propagation. This is actually a good time of year to take cuttings from plants. And I know it seems counterintuitive, right? Because you're cutting into a plant that's growing, right? And you're thinking, but I want my plant to grow. But actually, propagation actually is counterintuitive. It's very confusing. You're supposed to remove that fresh, optimal growth. And one species that I want to highlight that I just keep seeing all over the garden, and I keep thinking to myself, oh my gosh, Alejandro, I should just propagate all these plants, but I can't do that because that's stealing. So have you noticed the reddish new growth on sages? They're currently pushing winter growth. So this kind of like burgundy growth that you see specifically on a lot of purple sages, I don't know if y'all have noticed, but if you haven't, I definitely encourage you to go back in your backyard or look at a sage in your neighborhood and just notice the color of the new growth on salvias in particular. The purple sages they're going to have like this burgundy reddish new growth, and every time I see it I just think cutting, you know? So this is the optimal material for propagating via stem cutting. So I encourage you to also look for this new growth on other sages. You'll notice what new growth looks like on black sages, different selections of Cleveland sage, hummingbird sage. Definitely encourage this on buckwheats. Buckwheats, you're not going to see this colored tinge, but you're definitely going to see what new growth looks like. And Ceanothus species. All of these species are often propagated via stem cuttings. So sages, I had someone ask about sages. I have the slide just for you. And what I'm going to say is, are you confused? I'm confused. Sages are also confused. Dry winter conditions usually signal for plants to bloom out of season. So this is actually one of the garden's horticultural introductions, Dara's Choice Sage, named after the garden's first propagator, Dara E. Emery. So the spent flower heads can be removed if you're concerned about aesthetics, but I'm not concerned about aesthetics, and I want to encourage you to consider keeping these the spent flower stalks or these inflorescences on the sages as habitat value, right? After these beautiful flowers have been pollinated, they actually are home to copious amounts of seeds that are going to feed our bird friends. So there's a lot of habitat value there, and they also add visual interest in the garden. But if you have a sage that's just blooming out of control, out of season, you know what? Everything is confused right now, and confusion is such a valid feeling. Your sage is telling you it's valid to be confused, okay? Woolly blue curls. So now I'm just going to talk about a couple things that have come to mind as I walk around the garden. And again, these are all my pictures. Aren't they so great, everyone? Come on, show
So
them
good.
love. They're
So good.
amazing. So
Yeah.
National
woolly blue,
Geographic style.
yay, thank you so much. I'm ready to be a photographer. So this is the woolly blue curls. It's not recommended as a gateway plant, but I recommend trying it out. And you're probably wondering, Alejandro, what are you talking about? Drugs? Gateway? What are you talking about? No, I'm talking about a plant that just is going to encourage you to explore native plants. For me, my gateway native plant was actually California sagebrush. And the California sagebrush is such an easy plant to cultivate. So I encourage you to recommend these plants to your friends so that they can get jazzed about native plant horticulture. But I probably wouldn't recommend this woolly blue curls as the first plant for someone to try out because they are from the chaparral plant community. And because they are from the chaparral plant community, you've probably have seen this plant on hikes, but they have a strong preference for rocky, well-draining soils. Full sun is best for these plants, but they thrive with neglect. Oh my gosh, something that thrives with neglect, I love it. So you don't, this plant really, this plant really wants to be summer dry. Oftentimes, if you water it in the summer, you can end up killing it. In fact, we're still learning how to cultivate this plant at the garden. So definitely not for the new gardener, but if you want to experiment, why not? Nevin's barberry, also in bloom at the garden. This is a rare plant in the wild, y'all. Apparently, there's only a few individuals out there. I think there's like less than 500, and most of those individuals are grown in gardens and botanic collections. This is a plant that's native to a lot of the transverse mountain ranges. In the garden, it makes a great barrier plant because it's so spiny. And it's adored by birds because it produces these really interesting red colored berries. And if you're thinking of how to use it in the landscape, just ask yourself, do you have a neighbor that you don't like? Just plant this plant next to your neighbor and it's going to be great. It's a great barrier plant. It's super spiny. Okay, y'all, I realize that I'm just having too much fun here and we're kind of nearing the end, but I promise I'm going to wrap this up, but not before I ask Kevin for another pun after I explain California peony. So, California peony is also a beautiful plant that's growing in our collection. And even with the minimal rainfall, we're starting to see signs of new growth on this plant. So, California peony or Peonia californica in the peony family, Peoniaceae. So this is a herbaceous perennial that actually dies back to a fleshy taproot in the summer, and it blooms in early spring. So it's going to start to bloom soon, I hope. So this picture is actually taken at the pollinator garden at the Botanic Garden, but I've actually been able to see this one flower in the wild at Triumphal Creek Park in Westlake Village near Thousand Oaks, and that's me holding the flower. Isn't that so cute? It's just a really interesting native flower that you see in the early springtime, and it almost just blooms. It has a very short bloom time, so it's often just a treat to look for this in the wild. So just wanted to share the California peony with y'all.
Mm.
Before we start to wrap up, Kevin, do you have another pun? I just
This
want
is
to
my
put you on
last one.
spot. Okay, this is your last
Okay, this is
one.
fine. I'm gonna pick my worst one then.
Okay, your best one
Um,
actually.
what what
Your
is
best.
the beautiful, amazing Manzanita's favorite exercise?
I don't know.
The branch press, like a bench press, but they have cool branches.
Yeah, we're gonna pretend you didn't say that, Kevin.
Okay,
Okay,
I told
Island
you it was the worst
Ceanothus.
one. Keep going, keep going, keep going.
Island Ceanothus. I just want to share, just like Ceanothus is doing so well in the garden this time of year.
Mhm.
Our island Ceanothus or Ceanothus arboreus, it's endemic to the Channel Islands. It has these brilliant blue flowers. It's great as an informal hedge or focal specimen. That's a close up of the flowers that I took near our home demonstration garden. So just want to highlight the Ceanothus as an amazing species to incorporate into the landscape. And as one of the trivia questions alluded to at the beginning, or highlighted, is Ceanothus is what that species that is the reason we have what we call the Santa Barbara snow, and in particular, it is the big pod Ceanothus or Ceanothus megacarpus. So definitely want to encourage you to look to the mountains this winter and just appreciate the beautiful flowers that this species presents. It comes in many different shades. Ceanothus megacarpus usually has like this white flower, and it's a really interesting species to incorporate into the landscape. So I definitely encourage you to visit the nursery at the Botanic Garden to see what the selection looks like. Pests, and I just gonna promise we're gonna wrap up in the next 5 minutes. I'm totally gonna be respectful of people's times, but you're probably wondering, what do you have pests in the wintertime? And the answer is yes. Common invertebrate pests include aphids, mealybugs, and scale this time of year, and it's because they're attracted to lush new growth on plants during the winter and early spring.
Mm.
But what I'm finding, y'all, are a lot of aphids, black aphids, on this beautiful St. Catherine's lace plant that I have planted in a container at my house. And it is just full of aphids right now. But you want to know something? I don't bother cleaning it up because I know there's a bird out there who's going to clean this up for me. In fact, there is this yellow bird, and I'm so sorry, Scott. I don't know the name of this bird, but it's yellow bird. It's called yellow bird. And there's this yellow bird who just cleans it up all the time. They're like playing all over the branches. And I just look at it from my kitchen door and I say, thank you. I know you're eating up those aphids. I don't know how to repay you. So birds will clean up the mess for you. And this is just another example of leaving the pest, because there is always something in a balanced ecosystem that's going to clean that up for you. Or if you can't, if the birds aren't finding this plant, you can always use horticultural oils or soaps to clean it up. So I want to encourage you to see pest as this beautiful challenge. It's never going to be something that's going to completely disfigure your plant. It's usually seasonal, but I encourage you to just wait and sit and see who's attracted to it. In a balanced ecosystem, there's always someone who's going to help you out there. All right, y'all. So we're wrapping up. I just want to provide, I just want to say thank you, Kevin. You've been great. I appreciate all your jokes, and your support has meant the world to me. Um,
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. And I just thank you all so much for participating this evening. I just want to leave you with a couple of resources. So I want to remind people or introduce the California Native Plant Landscaper certification to people. It's a 20-hour class that has both weekend and evening classes. So I hope that it's flexible enough for people to take. But if you yourself or your gardener or you're a landscape designer or you work for the city and you're interested in learning more about native plant horticulture, specifically plant selection, irrigation, maintenance, this class may be for you. In fact, it is just for you. Forget I said may, it's for you. Classes begin February 26th. So they start at the end of this month. And Kevin has graciously made this beautiful QR code for you to scan if you're interested in signing up right now. Or if you have a gardener that you're wondering, hey, my gardener could probably benefit from this information. The program does cost $325, but you know what? If it's worth it to you, or if you have someone that you want to support to get through this program, I highly recommend it. We have a couple of graduates of this program in the audience tonight, and I've heard great things from them. They said it's been really great for them. So I just want to encourage you all to look into this and see if it's something right for you. If you have questions, I'll have my email at the end of the presentation this evening. But if you're interested, I do want to offer up the California Native Plant Landscaper certification as an opportunity for you to grow your business and develop new skills and meet like-minded individuals. So
The link is in the chat too if you
the
hate
link is
QR
in the chat.
codes.
The link is in the chat. So if I haven't sold it to you this evening, I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with you. This has been my pitch. All right, so a couple of other things. Horticulture classes at the garden. There's other ways to get involved with to get your hands dirty. You don't have to take a 20-hour certification. We also offer horticulture classes for the community. So on Sunday, February 9th, we have Get to Know and Grow Ceanothus. Come on, you have to be with me there. It's going to be fun. On Sunday, the 16th, we have a propagation class, Growing California Native Plants from Seed. And on Saturday, February 22nd, we have our quarterly maintenance class. So come out to the garden, learn all about what the garden is doing. It's led by our talented and incredible grounds manager, Stephanie, who's pictured there, just showing people how to plant and just showing their awesomeness. So it's always fun time. If you're interested, bring your questions and come learn from the garden, see what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. And we're also really excited to learn from you all. So it's just really a fun opportunity to showcase plant knowledge. And then the very last thing I will leave you with all tonight is we do have a spring planting event on February 15th happening at the garden. Reservations are required. It's listed on our website on our events page, but it's going to be a great event for you to check out what plants are available in the nursery because it's still planting season despite the drier winter conditions we are seeing. But hopefully after this evening, you feel inspired and motivated to get out there and add some native plants to the landscape. So I just want to say thank you. And if you have questions, my email is listed there. Again, I'm the horticultural educator at the garden, so I'm more than happy to answer your questions, or if there's a class you want to take, or if you feel like our California Native Plant Landscaper certification is for you or for your gardener, feel free to reach out if you have questions. But I want to thank you all this evening. So thanks so much for hanging out. Thanks so much, Kevin. Have a good evening.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Alejandro.
Alejandro.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. I hope you all learned a lot. Please stay in touch, ask questions.
Thank you very
Good night,
much.
everybody.
Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you next.
Okay.
Thanks, Gene.